I have a lot of logos here. I represent a lot of different organizations today because I work for a lot of different organizations. I work for Extension. I help do the Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program. And I do work with Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society Farm Breeding Club. So we'll talk a little bit about some of what that's all about. Today we're going to talk about breeding vegetables. We've heard a lot about growing things so far. Well, let's talk about how we get them. So we've known for a very long time that it's a good idea to raise gardens. This is a World War I vintage poster suggesting you should do some gardening because Uncle Sam's going to come and check if you don't. So anyway, we know growing a garden is a good thing. There's a lot of benefits. There's marketing potential, good fresh food potential. But where do we get all these things that we grow? Someone has to breed them. And who are all these breeders? Who is it that actually does this behind-the-scenes work to come up with the vegetable and fruit varieties that we want to grow? Well, my goodness, there are laboratory scientists who do this work. There are people who've never stepped foot in a school in their lives. Pretty much anyone who works with plants can be a plant breeder. So we've got highly educated folks who work in the field or in the lab. We've got farmers who are highly educated in their own way, and everyone in between. Pretty much anyone with the interest, who's interested in plants and wants to do the breeding work, can do the breeding work. Anywhere you are on planet Earth. And people have been doing it for some 10 to 20,000 years. So we know it's okay. There was once a time when it was just expected that farmers and gardeners were going to do breeding. Here are a couple of extension publications. Well, one's actually an Egg Experiment Station publication, but plant breeding for farmers, 4-H clubs teaching young kids how to breed plants. That was just part and parcel of how things were done back in the day. Why not us? Why not now? Certainly these same techniques are still there and waiting for us, and we could certainly take up some of this if we were so inclined, and we don't even have to have a cool hat like the kid does there. North Dakota Ag College, now NDSU, once actually promoted the concept. Our vegetable breeder back in the 20s and 30s, A.F. Yeager, suggested that perhaps some would be stimulated to perhaps take up plant breeding themselves. So he thought that what he was doing was something anyone could do and probably have a good time doing it. And it might be very helpful given that it's hard to find vegetables that grow here. So the more hands, the better. So plant breeding is to improve varieties. Why are we going to do this? Why would you undertake this effort? One is because the varieties you have available aren't well adapted or aren't as productive as you'd like. Maybe you need a faster maturity, something a little more cold hardy, maybe a little more drought hardy. Maybe something that can take a little bit more of whatever rust or blight or whatever else is coming through. Maybe the people in the marketplace want a different color of something. These are things to work on. Maybe whatever it is you've got is not the most desirable. Too many seeds, not thick enough, not sweet enough, whatever it might be. People are very fickle, and they like 1,000 million different things. And you can find plants that will fit that and then have a nice market going for you. You might find that you want some independence in your operation. You want to make sure that this variety you like to grow is going to have seeds you can actually get. I don't know how many of you have noticed in the last 10 to 20 years, but hybrid varieties come and go pretty fast. And when you find one you like, it doesn't mean it's going to be there next year. That's very disconcerting if you've got a good market for one, or if it's just absolutely your favorite and you just can't find a source anymore. And with all the seed consolidation, there have been quite a few varieties that have faded away. If you want to have your own seed and make sure it's there, maybe you need to breed your own. And maybe you'd like to have some fun. Maybe you'd like to do something that was really, really interesting. I can think of nothing better than plant breeding. It adds a lot to my garden experience, and I'll bet a lot of other folks would enjoy it too. If you like looking at plants, watching them develop, especially getting something good at the end of the process, plant breeding adds one more layer to the gardening experience. Well, what do we mean when we say something's improved? Improved varieties perform better, whatever better means. So, however it performs on the farm, however it performs in the marketplace, we're going to try to get it so that it does better than it was before. So it's a relative term. Oh, I'm going to hit some biology now. Here it comes. Here's one. The words phenotype. Breeders will talk about a lot of interesting terms. I'm not going to hit you with too many of them because I just want to dabble your toe into this deep pool of entertainment and excitement. But phenotype is one we need to understand. So a phenotype is how things look. How do they appear? And how things appear depends upon the environment in which they grow and all of the genes inside that organism. A good example would be if you've ever planted out a hybrid of anything. Have you ever seen one plant that seemed more stunted than the rest? Or one that was especially better than the rest? They're genetically identical. But sometimes the performance is different because of the specific environment of this piece of my ground here versus this piece of my ground over there. Or sometimes I have a different season than the year before, and sometimes a hybrid will do very well this year and not so well that year. The phenotype keeps varying even though the genetics, the genotype, has not. It's an important thing to make or to keep clear, because as we're breeding, we're going to be looking for fixing this. As breeders, what we can do is fix the genotype. We can find that set of genes inside this plant, get them fixed in some way so that time and time again we get the right kind of phenotype in the specific area we want to grow these things. So I can breed some plants, I can get those genes fixed. Doesn't mean it's going to do really well in every environment, but I'm going to try to make sure it makes a good phenotype in the environment where I'm expecting it to grow. So I can breed in North Dakota. That doesn't mean it's going to do well in North Carolina, but it might do really, really well here. Those are the two things. Genes are inherited. The environmental effects are not. So it's an important thing to keep clear. So traditionally what breeders are going to do is examine phenotypes of plants in hopes of better identifying good genotypes and fixing those so that over time in this area we will get those phenotypes that we want to see, which is productive, healthy, saleable, delicious, nutritious vegetables and fruits. Okay. Now I'm going to describe the basic process, because it is really a very basic process. There are ways to make this exceedingly simple, and there are ways to make it very complicated. I would suggest starting on the simple end first and working your way up. But what we're going to do is 5 steps. Set our breeding objectives, get useful genetics, then we're going to make some crosses, select offspring, and then evaluate them to see if they actually are improved. So I'll just walk through those quickly. Breeding objectives. A.F. Yeager suggested this was really critical. One of the principal jobs is to recognize the need for variety of a particular kind. Now once we know that we need the specific sort, and we do need it sometimes very, very specific, now we can breed it. We just have to know what we want. If we select for it, we will get it. That is the mantra of plant breeding. If you want it, you can get it. Just have to do it. So, what is it you want to grow? You have to pick that crop and then decide maturity, fruit size, shape, flavor, hundreds of different traits, whatever it might be. We have to come to understand that crop and the basis of those traits, and then we'll try to breed something that has them. Lots of fun, lots of plants out there in the world. Then we're going to obtain useful genetics. So we're going to try to find some parents that have genes for those traits that we want. Say we've got our very, very favorite squash we've been growing for years, but we just really want it to be earlier. The best thing to do would be to find another really delicious squash that was early, if possible, and cross it to yours. Or at least find one that was pretty useful and early. Cross them together, and then we're going to see what comes of it. We can go to varieties that are out there commercially. We can see populations and varieties that other farmers and gardeners have. The USDA National Plant Germplasm System is chock full of tens of thousands of different varieties of every major crop around planet Earth. It's a great source of interesting and useful genetics for many different varieties. A lot of old varieties of crops are stored there. Not all of them, unfortunately, but they would be overwhelmed. But a lot of old varieties of things that were grown, including from here in North Dakota, can be found there and used as parents for further breeding. And of course, we can also use commercial varieties, which somehow ended up on its wrong, didn't end up on its separate line there. Commercial varieties are available for breeding as long as they are not patented. They can be plant variety protected. We still have a breeder's right in law to take that plant and cross it to something else and then breed. And a lot of hybrids out there are already two things crossed. If you save seeds from a hybrid of your favorite sort, you can breed with that. That's a lot of possibilities. It's actually incredible how easy it is. Here's just a sample of some genetic diversity out there. We've got some lettuce up there in the left. Anyone recognize what's in the upper right? Yep, those are acorn squashes. How about the lower right? Those are beans. And the lower left? Those are potatoes, including a lot of kinds I've never seen grown in North America. There are hundreds and hundreds of kinds of potatoes. So whatever it is, wherever you want to go, you just find the right parents out of this enormous complexity of available genetics and then off and running. It's a lot of fun. Okay, now we're going to make some crosses. In traditional plant breeding, sex takes place. So we're going to help those plants have sex with between the right parents so that we can get offspring of the right sort. So I have an example there of a squash blossom closed so that I can pollinate it later. So we get involved in pollinating, sometimes get our hands involved in it. Sometimes we let the wind or animals, bugs, what have you, do the pollinating. It depends on our goals and what system we're using, but pollination will occur between these parents. So we'll get new genetic combinations to try to find those new genotypes to give us the good phenotypes. So we're going to grow out those offspring. The first year, they're hybrids. They are all very, very similar. The next generation after that, we see all kinds of segregation into different forms. It's that second generation where we're going to go in and start selecting offspring to see which ones are heading towards the goals that we set. Here are David Podol and his sister-in-law Teresa looking at some potato variation there. They got some actual true potato seeds and planted them out, and they're now selecting among some of those seeds or seedlings. Okay, after making some selections for several years, after several years of letting the genotypes become fixed, we're going to have something that's pretty close to a final product. We're going to have something we think is pretty promising out of the many hundreds that we might have seen initially. The next step to really know we're hitting the mark is to compare what we have in the target environment to make sure we're getting that desired phenotype. So we're going to put them out in plots, replicated over the site, over locations, over years, and especially compare them with the very best ones that are available right now to see if we've got something that's still better. That's what the professionals will do. Do you have to get that intense when you're doing it at home? No, you don't. All you have to do is meet what you want. If you just want something that has a different color, the breeding process is hugely easy. If you're trying to get something that has the very, very best yield, it takes more effort. And then everything in between is various levels. But it's all doable. How doable is all this? Well, here are some trials of barley and lentils in the mountains in Yemen. So farmers on the edges of marginal lands in difficult places can do crop variety trials. In places where we have much more resources, like these folks here in the central area of Iran, hard to tell it from the Red River Valley, but there they've got irrigated plots, and those farmers are doing some selections along with plant breeders. We do evaluations all over the state of North Dakota, and even the Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society Farm Breeding Club has done its own variety trials along the way. Once you're done with that, then if you know you've got something really good, you can keep growing it, you can sell it, do whatever you're going to do with it. The process is finished until you've set yourself some new goals and start over. That's what professional breeders just live for. Keep it a-growing. This is a diagram of the basic concept of breeding for wheats especially. Some of the other wheats, beans, tomatoes, a lot of crops would follow this basic pattern where we make a cross, we have the F1, we start to see segregation in the F2, that second generation, and then we make selections and observe them over a period of years until the genotypes are fixed. We do our evaluations and we're done. This process can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years depending on what you got and how big you're going to get your project. You might need many, many acres to do this, or you might just need some space in your garden. It depends on the traits you're working on and the crops you're working on. However, I don't think we need to spend all of our time looking at all of that. We could start to look at some examples of what people have done. I've got a few fixed here for you. Later on, when I hope we get to some discussion time, because that's really where I'm hoping we'll get ourselves, we can talk about some other things as well, and whatever crops you might throw we'll deal with it as we can. But I'm going to walk through some examples from very, very easy to somewhat more complex, just to give you a feel for the kinds of breeding that vegetable growers are doing in their gardens and in their fields. So let's start with daikon radishes. Anybody grown daikon radishes? Okay. Huge radishes, not those little firecracker radishes that people eat. These are big, big roots. Sometimes they're even sweet. It depends. Daikon is obviously a word from the Orient. The Japanese perfected these, and people do like to grow them. Emily Stiglmeyer is a Farm Breeding Club member in Selby, South Dakota, and she is looking for radishes to use as cover crops. Okay, that's a slightly different use than most. She wants roots that are big, plants that have amazing early vigor, and lots of dense foliage. So she knows what she wants to get. She's been evaluating potential parents, making some early selections among those, and she's going to use open pollination and then mass selection. So she's just getting started with this process. She's going to let the bees do all of the pollinating, which is the easy way, and just make selections from there. What she's doing could be carried out for other types of radishes, including those that you would actually like to eat directly yourselves. She's selecting daikon radishes to use sort of as a field crop.
How do you compensate for different seasons? This spring is not anything like last spring.
Yes. That is one of the big rubs of plant breeding. It is. Lots of genotypes are awesome in the right environment, and when the environment changes, they don't look that good. So consequently, when we really want to make sure we can do the job for the target environment, we evaluate for as many seasons as possible. That's really all we got. Yeah?
How is that an example of plant breeding? It looked like she was just selecting a plant from a different country.
Well, yes. Well, I'll explain it. She looked at a group of different varieties from all over the world, dug up the roots, and then tried to find plants that had the roots she wanted. And then she was going to save those as parents. So she had already set up her goal. She wanted the big root, the vigorous growth, and the dense foliage. She planted these out, chose the right parents, and this spring she's going to plant those back out and let them cross, and she will then start a new population from which we'll do some more selecting.
Okay, so what's she going to cost them? What question?
Among themselves. Yeah, all of those different roots that she's saving will be pollinated among the group. So the roots she liked from Japan and Pakistan and India and everything will be brought together for the very first time in Selby, South Dakota. And she's hoping from there to push the envelope and get some really awesome big rooted radishes. If we wanted different radishes for eating, we might choose some different goals. We might grow out some of these later and then test the offspring to see if they have the right taste and such. But it's just the basic part of the process and just a simple start to a mass selection project. Okay, let's talk about onions. Now, radishes generally are annuals, although there are some that act like biennials. Onions that we eat are biennials. So this is a slightly more complicated plant to work with. If we're going to work with plants, we need to understand the basic biology of that plant. How does it reproduce? How does it make seeds? How do we get it through the entire life cycle over and over and over? So Dakota Tears onion is an onion bred near Fullerton, North Dakota, and this is how this was done. Some years back, David Podol wanted onions that would grow in North Dakota and store a very long time to provide good onions to his family throughout the winter and into the spring. A very reasonable goal. So he planted several different varieties, found bulbs that looked nice from healthy plants that stored throughout the winter, and he took those and he replanted them. That's how it works with onions. You replant those bulbs, and in the second season, they will put up a seed head. They put up a flower head, and then they make seeds. So he let those come up. He let the bees cross-pollinate them. So then he generated a new population with new genetic variation. And from this, he started selecting. What's the big secret? Just doing it repeatedly. So for many years now, he's had his population. He plants out the plants in the springtime, selects good healthy bulbs, stores them through the winter. The following year he plants out bulbs for seed, gets the new crossed seed from those selections, and then continues. So he's continually recycling. And what we call this is recurrent selection, where each life cycle we're going to make some kind of selections. It's a very basic kind of mass selection. It's not keeping track of the families. It's just looking at this population as a group and just picking out the plants that he likes, keeping a minimum number of plants to keep the genetic diversity high enough, and then selecting from there. Are we all done? Okay. So after some years, he had an onion that was dependable, would mature on time, store right through till spring every single year, and he's now commercially producing that seed and selling it. And the family's been eating the onions for many, many years. So this is a great way to not only raise onions, but also produce seed from them. Okay, we're going to step back in time and look at a little bit more complicated process about sunshine sweet corn. Now, probably nobody here has ever seen or heard of sunshine sweet corn. Anybody heard of that one? All right, that is a 1926 release from the North Dakota Agriculture College back when we had a vegetable breeding program. It was a very successful program. Breeders at the time were breeding just about anything you can think of, including sweet corn. It was quite popular for some years, and then obviously we've gotten improved things since then. You can still find the seed, I think. I think the seed still exists. So A.F. Yeager released this in 26. He wanted a high quality, good marketable, good eating quality corn that was early, yellow, and sweet that you could grow in North Dakota. There were several varieties out there. The yellow ones were kind of slow, not always dependable. The white ones were white, and people wanted yellow. But some of the white ones also had good quality and were early, so he thought, well, why not cross them? So, in 1919, he put out a plot of golden bantam. That was the common yellow one at the time, very high quality, a little slow, but yellow. And he grew that out with rows of 3 other sweet corns that were white, high quality, but early. And so while he's doing this, he's assessing or evaluating those white ones to see which would be the best parent. All of the white corn is detasseled, and you just let the yellow corn provide the pollen for pollination. And come fall, he He selected the seeds off of the best white one that was there. Now we've got crossed seed. All those seeds would be yellow because white is recessive. It's a trait that's hidden by the dominant trait yellow. So in 1920, he grows out this F1 seed. He plants all yellow seed. What do you suppose he gets then in that next generation?
Some yellow, some white.
Yeah, some yellow and some white. So he wants yellow. So he goes through the seed in 1920 and he picks out dark yellow colored kernels, the ones that are probably pure yellow now, and he replants those. 1921, he's going to self the early plants and only save seed from those that provided pure yellow ears. He doesn't want any mixed white in there, just pure yellow. That was his goal. Selfing corn is something that's unusual for most. How many of you have actually pollinated corn on purpose? Oh, well. This is the rig we use. Here, I'm going to put this around my microphone wire, so I'm not going to go very far. But I've got here a pollination apron. I've got my tassel bags for collecting pollen. I've got my little chute bags here for covering up the ears so that they don't get pollen until I want it. I think I must have dropped, oh no, here we go. It's my quick gun there. There's my stapler for stapling the bags when I'm all done. I've got some markers and other things here. Corn breeders are a little cracked, I guess, but this is the stuff we like to do. And we want to do controlled pollinations. This is the gear that we'll use. Don't have to do controlled pollinations. You can do completely open pollinated if you so desire. If you want pure yellow out of a mixed population, it may take you some time to get it pure because the pollen flies. However, if you're able to self, you can fix that trait right away and then just move forward with pure yellow. And that's what Dr. Yeager was doing. All right, for several years after that, he just grew out individual rows or small plots from individual ears, made observations, detasseled anything that was slow, detasseled, and entire plots would just lose all of their tassels. Didn't want anything from that plot. In some of the rows or plots he liked, he'd detassel anything that was slow. Just keep pushing things towards early maturity. Later on in that, they started to actually cook it and eat the corn and make selections based on taste, which I think is critical if you want good sweet corn. I mean, it's easy to get sweet corn, but it's hard to get really, really good sweet corn. So he wanted good. And so they kept pushing it that way. In 1925, 100 open pollinated ears, we call those half-sib families because we know what the mother was, but we don't know which dad was. So we got lots of fathers as the pollen blows on the wind. So he planted out a seed from 100 ears. Those that came from the best single plots from the year before were planted. Off types were detasseled. Other ears were just sold. I'm sure it was nice getting fresh sweet corn on campus. Do they do that in Fargo anymore? I don't think anyone is even doing sweet corn in Fargo, do they? It must have been awesome to get out on your lunch break and have fresh sweet corn between classes. At any rate, they made a final selection and released the seed to growers. Growers grew it out the first time in 1926, and by 1927, Dr. Yeager figured there was about 2,500 acres of sunshine sweet corn being grown around the country. So a little bit more of an involved process, but it doesn't have to be. If you just want something early and you're not worried about some of these traits, you could just do the same open pollinated process for some years and continue to make selections, and you could get something that you like pretty well. Some crops, you don't need many plants. If you're going to keep corn and keep a vigorous population, you usually need at least 100 individuals somewhere along the line to maintain that genetic diversity. All right, back to a more common vegetable, zucchini. Zucchini actually gets bred. People actually try to make it more productive. My God, but they do. Even more zucchini. So this is about dark star zucchini. This is a new variety. You can get, I don't think there's too many outlets for it right now, but it's grown primarily in California where it was developed, but I believe it's supposed to be very drought hardy, and I've had it recommended to me as something we should consider in North Dakota if we want even more zucchini. Okay, so we had a couple of successful market gardeners serving the San Francisco area. They were growing a hybrid called Raven for some years. Really liked it. They liked it because it was very uniform, very nice dark green color, which the people like to buy, produced 8-inch long, 2-inch wide fruits. That was the primo fruits that they wanted. That's what they took to the market. That's where they got their most money from. That's what they wanted to get. They started having seed shortages. Raven hybrid was here some years, not here other years. Sometimes only certain growers could get it and other people couldn't get it. So they decided they had to do something to make sure they had an ongoing supply of good high quality seed. So they started growing an open pollinated population called Black Beauty, which had pretty decent looking fruits, but it had a lot of off types. And they, looking at it, decided that they would actually have to grow 4 times as much zucchini as before in order to get enough perfect fruit to take to the market. And all the rest would just be off types they couldn't sell. That didn't seem workable. So they decided to start a breeding project and get it better. So they crossed Raven with this Black Beauty and then did mass selection for some years. They would just go out, find plants that looked especially good, save seed from those, bulk the seeds together, and then replant the next year. That's the way most plant breeding's ever been done. It's really a fairly easy process. Almost anyone could do that, even me. So they did it for some years, selected their best. It wasn't always perfect. So in 2003, they talked to the seed company that they're working with, and they made an arrangement to work with Dr. John Navazio, who is a plant breeder, to come and help them speed up the process and get it more effective. So in 2003, they self-pollinated their 50 best-looking plants. Because pollinations don't always work, they ended up with seed from 26 of their very best plants. They planted out rows of plants from each of these 26 families. Now, these folks had some space. They probably planted very large rows, but if you only had 2 or 3 from each one, that might also be fine. But obviously, for a project like this, you do have to have some room. Of those 26 rows, only 4 of them seemed to have anything going for them that they liked. So they saved seed from those. Everything else was tilled under. They just let those 4 open pollinate among themselves. The next year, they planted out those families into rows and assessed them. And they decided that there was really only one of those families that was especially good. The rest of those were tilled under, and they only allowed that family to open pollinate and generate seed. That was released as Dark Star in 2006. So you can see from where they started, it took 4 years of mass selection, might have only needed to be 2, 1 year of selfing, and then 2 years of assessing the half-sib or open pollinated families to see which was the very best one. With crops like zucchini, you can self them and get them pretty genetically narrow and they're still fine. And so that's why this works so well. With corn, you'd want to have more rows than that probably. Dark Star is available. It's supposed to be drought tolerant. I haven't grown it yet, but it's a bush type and it does throw a lot of very high quality, very marketable zucchinis. But I suppose you still have to find them before they turn into a submarine, but you know how it goes. Here's some pictures from the Organic Seed Alliance website where I borrowed the story. I've heard John Navazio talk about this for some years now. There's Bill Reynolds, probably with, no, that's not, I don't think that's John. Bill Reynolds up in the upper left, and then down with his partner Donna in the lower right. They've been out selfing zucchinis. You can see how big this field is in a couple of those pictures, and then one of those perfect fruits in the upper right that they're really trying to get. They've got a lot of space there. And one reason why this one was suggested as a maybe drought-tolerant variety for us to think about is that in this part of California, it basically doesn't rain in the summer. So whatever moisture those plants get, it's from the soil, period. It might be very deep soil, I don't know, but this is why it might be interesting to take a peek at. So all of us can do some of this. We can do the breeding, we can develop improved varieties. It's fun, and you can eat all the results along the way. You can't lose. You cannot lose being a breeder of vegetables. Any of the off types you still get to eat, and once you get to the end, you win. You got something marvelous to take to the market or preserve for yourself or share with all of humanity, however the case may be. I've got a few things I want to mention before I quit, other than thank you, you're a marvelous audience. If you're interested in this process and how it works, there are some resources I would suggest. One would be where I got started is, now this is the old edition, but it doesn't matter too much, Carol Deppe, Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties. An awesome book that walks you through all the biology of many different plants and how that works, explains the pollination process, explains the selection process and how we evaluate things. It's really a marvelous book, very inspirational. If you like to go beyond that to even more academic, there are academic books on breeding. Some of them are very good. Principles of Cultivar Development by Walter Fair explains the theory and techniques behind breeding. Carol's is more down to earth if you like that, but you know, we've got a lot. Some of us like to read hard to read stuff sometimes. Organic Crop Breeding is a new book that just got published in Europe. This one is probably very expensive, but if you can find a copy at a university library, it has lots of interesting things going. To do any breeding though, one thing you have to do is do some things different. Because we're going to take these plants not to where we want to harvest them to eat, we're going to take them to seed. Now for sweet corn, that means going beyond the edible stage and letting the seeds dry. But that's sort of the direction we're heading anyway. For squashes, we take the fruits that are full of seeds. That's when we normally harvest them anyway. Those are simple. But for some things, we're going to take them an extra year to make seeds, or we're going to take our lettuces and let them bolt to be these 6-foot-tall monsters covered with flowers. That's a little bit different process. I suggest a couple of things is to find out about saving seeds, because you'll have to do that as a breeder. This is probably one of the best ones ever, Susan Ashworth's Seed to Seed. An exceptional book that explains how to raise relatively pure seed of varieties of many, many different kinds of crops. That's a good primer for breeders. The Canadian seed group, Seeds of Diversity Canada, also has a slightly small primer called a handbook, How to Save Your Own Seeds, a handbook for home seed production. And you can get a hold of the Seeds of Diversity Canada online and find their stuff. Well, thanks so much for your time then. Have great adventures in your gardens.
If you enjoyed this program, would like to see it again, or send the link to your friends, it's available at freetv.org.